In the shadowed heart of Louisiana's bayou, where the veil between earth and eternity thins like mist at dawn, an entire cabin of souls vanished overnight. Not burned by fire, not shattered by storm, but erased by an unseen hand, as if God himself had reached down to claim retribution for sins unspoken. What force could devour the guilty and spare the stones? Listen, and feel the chill of judgment creeping in. The fog clung to the earth like a spectral veil, heavy with the secrets of the night, as if the very ground whispered confessions it could no longer bear. It was April 1865, in the bayou-laced lowlands of southern Louisiana, where the air hummed with the ghosts of a dying war. The Civil War's final gasps echoed from distant battlefields. Richmond fallen, Lee's surrender at Appomattox a fresh wound in the Confederate soul. For the planters, it was the unraveling of an empire built on blood and chains. For the enslaved, a fragile dawn of liberty, tainted by the fear that freedom might slip away like smoke. On the sprawling Belvue Plantation, once a jewel of cotton and cane, now frayed at the edges with overgrown weeds and peeling grandeur, the morning broke not with birdsong, but with a primal wail that shattered the pre-dawn hush. Old Ezekiel, his spine curved like a question mark from years bent over hoe and plow, shuffled through the dew-soaked grass toward the slave quarters. His calloused feet knew the path by heart, each step a ritual etched into his bones. In one hand, he gripped a tin pail sloshing with well water, its metallic tang mixing with the loamy scent of fertile soil. The quarters loomed ahead, a ragged line of weathered shacks huddled against the encroaching woods, their cypress walls silvered by time and relentless humidity. But as Ezekiel neared cabin 9, the one set apart, closer to the shadowy tree-line, his eyes, rheumy with age, narrowed in confusion. The familiar bulk was absent. No rough-hewn logs rising defiantly against the sky. No faint curl of smoke from its chimney. Just a void, a perfect rectangle of exposed stone foundation, gleaming unnaturally clean under the first pale fingers of light. He halted, the pail slipping from his grasp with a dull thud, water pooling around his toes like spilled tears. Rubbing his eyes with knuckles gnarled as ancient roots, he stared again. The ground lay flat. Undisturbed, as if the earth had opened its maw in the dead of night and swallowed the structure whole, then sealed its lips with divine precision. No splintered timbers scattered like broken promises. No nails twisted in protest. No ash from a hidden blaze. The stones of the foundation, large, flat river rocks mortared with lime that had hardened like unforgiving judgment, sat pristine, scrubbed by some ethereal force. Dew beaded on them like holy water, untouched by human hand. Around the perimeter, the grass stood tall and untrampled, blades whispering in the breeze as if mocking the impossibility. Ezekiel's throat tightened, a knot of dread uncoiling in his gut. This wasn't mischief or mishap, it was erasure, a biblical vanishing that echoed the tales of Enoch, taken by God without trace, or Lot's wife turned to salt for looking back. His scream erupted then, a raw, guttural howl that tore from his chest like a soul fleeing judgment. It reverberated across the quarters, pulling others from their thin pallets and ragged dreams. Murmurs rose first, sleepy and questioning, then sharpened into gasps as figures emerged, wrapped in threadbare blankets against the chill. Women clutched children close, men stood rigid, fists clenched at their sides. They formed a hesitant circle around the void, their breaths visible in the mist like fleeting spirits. Eyes darted to the surrounding oaks, draped in Spanish moss like mourning veils, half expecting the cabin to reappear from the shadows, relocated by some cruel jest of fate. But no. The earth betrayed no struggle, no furrowed soil, no uprooted weeds. It was as if the divine architect had redrawn the world overnight, excising the cabin with surgical mercy or wrath. Whispers spread like wildfire through dry cane, the Lord's hand, retribution for the master's sins. Or the devil's bargain, come to collect. Fear mingled with a strange awe, for in this era of upheaval, where emancipation's promise hung like a storm cloud, such an omen felt laden with prophecy. Was this a sign of deliverance, or a warning that even the ground could turn against them? Jonah Hargrove, the overseer, a bull of a man with a face etched by whiskey and whip, stumbled from his ramshackle hut nearby, shotgun in hand, nightshirt askew. His boots crunched over gravel, each step pounding like a heartbeat in the tense air. What in God's forsaken name is this unholy din? He bellowed, voice thick with sleep and simmering rage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea before him, dark faces averting eyes trained by years of submission. He shoved forward, halting at the edge of the emptiness. His ruddy cheeks paled,
jaw unhinging as comprehension dawned.
The shotgun drooped, barrel kissing the dirt. Hargrove knelt, rough fingers tracing the cool, immaculate stones. No soot, no blood's coppery reek, no rot's damp decay. Just the faint, sacred aroma of fresh-turned earth, mingled with the distant smoke of breakfast fires from the remaining cabins. He rose slowly, knees popping like gunfire in the silence, his mind reeling against the plantation's brutal calculus. Cabins didn't vanish, they endured storms, floods, the lash of time. This one, built solid as scripture, with foundations laid deep to defy the bayou's floods, had housed souls whose labor fueled the empire.
Now, gone.
The rising sun painted the scene in golden hues, casting elongated shadows that danced mockingly over the void, amplifying its profundity. It was a chasm not just in earth, but in reality a rift where faith and fear collided. The hush that fell was profound, broken only by the rustle of leaves and a lone crow's caw, like a harbinger of doom. In that moment, the plantation felt unmoored, as if the sins of generations, greed, cruelty, the theft of human dignity had summoned a reckoning from on high.
To understand the weight of this vanishing, one must delve into the soul of Belvue Plantation, a microcosm of the antebellum South teetering on oblivion's brink.
Nestled in the labyrinthine bayous of St. Landry Parish, its vast acres rolled out like a verdant sea, cotton bolls blooming white as surrender flags, sugarcane stalks swaying like sentinels in the humid breeze. The main house, a Greek Revival monolith with towering columns and wide verandas, once gleamed under manicured gardens. Now, vines crept like insidious doubts, paint flaked like shed illusions, and the air carried the faint rot of decay. Master Elias Beaumont, absent in New Orleans chasing wartime fortunes, left the reins to Hargrove, whose iron fist masked a crumbling resolve. The slave quarters formed a somber village, a quarter-mile removed, where hope flickered like candlelight in the wind. 12 cabins in all, crude sentinels of logs and mud, roofs sagging under the weight of endless rains. Cabin 9 stood sentinel at the edge, nearer the woods where cypress knees jutted from swampy ground like bony fingers pointing accusations. Its construction bespoke reluctant craftsmanship, walls of hand-hewn cypress, resilient against rot, chinked with clay and Spanish moss that whispered in the night winds. The foundation, those fateful stones, were quarried from the nearby Atchafalaya River, laid in a rectangle mortared with lime sourced from burned oyster shells, a process that evoked alchemical transformation.
Iron nails, forged in the plantation's smithy, bit deep into the wood, symbolizing the unyielding bonds of servitude.
A single door, plank-thick and latched with wrought iron, faced east to greet the sun's indifferent rise. Inside, earthen floors compacted by countless footsteps, a stone hearth where embers glowed like suppressed rage, and pallet beds of corn husks that rustled with restless dreams. This humble abode sheltered a family woven from blood, loss, and unyielding resilience, a tapestry of souls entangled in the moral quagmire of slavery.
At its heart was Miriam, the elder, a woman in her
mid-50s whose face mapped the sorrows of her people, deep furrows like plowed fields, eyes dark as midnight wells reflecting ancestral wisdom. Her hair, threaded with silver, coiled in a crown that bespoke quiet royalty. Miriam was the healer, her hands anointed with the knowledge of roots and leaves, willow bark for fever, sassafras for purification, remedies passed down like sacred texts. She moved with the grace of one who had danced with death, her voice a soothing balm that wove stories of African kings and biblical escapes, planting seeds of redemption in parched hearts. In her, one sensed the echo of Proverbs, the righteous shall flourish like the palm tree, yet shadowed by the curse of bondage. Her son, Josiah, 40 years etched in sinew and scar, was the craftsman whose hands coaxed beauty from brutality. Lean and deliberate, his calluses told tales of axes swung, planks planed, structures raised to glorify his oppressors. Josiah's silence was his armor, a fortress against the overseer's taunts, but within burned an intellect sharp as his chisel. He understood the architecture of oppression, the way beams interlocked like chains, foundations rooted in stolen land, and dreamed of dismantling it. His work symbolized the paradox of creation amid destruction, a man building his own prison while harboring visions of exodus. Then there was Selah, Josiah's daughter, a luminous spirit of 20 whose eyes sparkled with forbidden curiosity. Her skin glowed like polished mahogany, her movements fluid as the bayou currents. Selah assisted Miriam and herb lore, grinding poultices that mended bodies while her mind pieced together smuggled news, Lincoln's proclamation, Union advances. She embodied hope's fragile flame, protective of her kin, her wit a weapon sheathed in smiles. In her burned the fire of Esther, a woman poised to intercede for her people amid peril. Young Micah, at 12, was the observer, his wide eyes drinking in the world's wonders and woes. Slender as a reed, he roamed the wood's fringes, noting the flutter of dragonflies, the shift of shadows, details that others dismissed.
His innocence clashed with budding questions: why the chains? Why the lash? He represented the uncorrupted soul, vulnerable to corruption, a reminder of Genesis's garden before the fall.
Living among them was Naomi, a woman in her late 30s, not of blood but bound by shared suffering. Widowed early when her husband was sold south, she found refuge in Cabin 9's warmth. Silent and steadfast, her memory was a vault, faces of the lost, dates of atrocities, whispers of rebellion.
Naomi's presence evoked Ruth's loyalty, a quiet vow to cling amid desolation.
Her companion, Reuben, a towering figure in his early 40s, lent his strength to the fields, muscles rippling like coiled ropes from years felling timber and hauling burdens. His words were sparse, actions eloquent: a shared meal, a mended roof. Reuben symbolized steadfast faith, like Job enduring trials, his dignity unbowed by degradation. Overseeing this fragile world was Hargrove, the enforcer whose soul festered with resentment. Late 40s, barrel-chested, his flushed visage betrayed nights drowned in corn liquor. Empathy was foreign to him, the enslaved were chattel, tools to wield. The war's end amplified his volatility, patrols tightened, punishments escalated as he clung to power like a drowning man to driftwood. He embodied the Pharaoh's hardened heart, blind to the plagues brewing. Life on Belvue pulsed with relentless rhythm, dawn calls summoning bodies to fields, where the sun beat down like divine scrutiny, sweat mingling with soil in a sacrament of toil. The air thickened with cotton's fluff, cane's syrupy sweetness, the crack of whips like thunderclaps of judgment.
Evenings brought collapse onto pallets, bodies aching like the earth's own groans.
Sundays offered respite, a clandestine church in the woods, hymns sung low, evoking spirituals that bridged earthly chains to heavenly freedom. Miriam's tales around the hearth invoked Moses, parting waters of oppression, while whispers of underground paths fueled dreams of Canaan.
Yet beneath pulsed a spiritual undercurrent, guilt's shadow over the land, sins of forebears crying out like Abel's blood. The vanishing of Cabin 9 felt like Elijah's chariot, whisking away the faithful, or perhaps Sodom's fire, sparing none. Was it divine justice, purging the tainted? Or a haunting legacy, where the oppressed's prayers summoned ethereal vengeance?
The air grew heavier, charged with omen, as if the bayou itself held its breath for what retribution might next unfold. In the hours following the discovery, the plantation stirred like a beast awakening to pain. Hargrove barked orders, his voice cracking with unaccustomed fear: search the woods.
Drag the bayou. Gangs fanned out, boots squelching through mud, lanterns flickering like will-o'-the-wisps in the gathering light.
They combed the tree-line, where ancient oaks stood sentinel, bark furrowed like worried brows. Spanish moss dangled like ghostly fingers, brushing shoulders and stirring chills. No tracks marred the soft earth, no broken branches hinted at flight. The bayou's murky waters yielded nothing, no floating debris, no bloated forms. It was as if the family had ascended in rapture, leaving the wicked to ponder their fate. Back at the void, Miriam's kin, or what remained of the quarter's community, gathered in hushed vigil. Elders muttered prayers, fingers tracing crosses in the air, invoking protection from unseen forces. Children clung to skirts, eyes wide with wonder and terror. The sun climbed higher, its heat dispelling the mist, but not the dread. Shadows shortened, yet the emptiness loomed larger, a moral abyss inviting reflection. What sins had precipitated this? The master's cruelty, perhaps, accumulating like storm clouds until heaven intervened. Or hidden transgressions within the cabin itself, jealousies, secrets buried deep as the foundation stones. As noon approached, Beaumont himself arrived on horseback, summoned by frantic messenger. A man of faded aristocracy, his fine coat dust-streaked, face ashen beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted with a groan, surveying the scene with eyes narrowed against disbelief. Impossible, he murmured, circling the foundation like a penitent around an altar. His fingers grazed the stones, cool and unyielding, symbols of permanence now mocking fragility. In his mind flashed visions of ruin, crops unharvested, labor fleeing, the empire crumbling like Babel's tower. Was this God's wrath for his forebears' greed, the original sin of slavery etched into the land? The enslaved watched from afar, a mix of awe and cautious hope stirring. Whispers rippled, "The Lord has spoken."
Freedom's sign. Yet fear tempered jubilation. What if the vanishing was but the first act in a greater judgment?
The air thrummed with spiritual tension, the bayou's chorus of frogs and insects a dirge for the lost. Sensory details assaulted, the metallic bite of fear on tongues, the prick of gooseflesh despite the warmth, the distant lowing of cattle like mournful pleas. By afternoon, rumors spread beyond Belvue, carried on wagons to neighboring plantations. Tales twisted, a voodoo curse, a union sabotage, a supernatural exodus. Hargrove, desperate to reclaim control, lashed out, whips cracked on innocent backs, accusations flew like arrows. But the void remained, an indelible scar, forcing confrontation with deeper truths. Fiends of redemption whispered, perhaps the vanished had been spared, translated to glory, while the guilty lingered in purgatory. As dusk fell, painting the sky in bruised purples, the plantation settled into uneasy watch. Fires flickered in remaining cabins, casting dancing shadows that evoked demonic play. Prayers rose fervent, beseeching mercy or vengeance. The vanishing wasn't mere mystery, it was a parable, a chilling reminder that divine retribution spares no structure, no soul. In the heart of Louisiana's twilight, where history and eternity intertwined, the empty foundation stood as testament. Sin's debt demands payment, and sometimes, the earth itself collects. The bayou's breath hung heavy in the air, a humid veil laced with the faint rot of decaying leaves and the metallic tang of impending rain. It was the kind of atmosphere that amplified every rustle, every creak, turning the ordinary into omens of something profound and perilous. In the waning days of April 1865, as the Confederacy's death throes echoed through the South, the enslaved on Belvue Plantation navigated a world on the cusp of cataclysm. Emancipation's rumors swirled like eddies in the swamp, tantalizing, treacherous, stirring souls long accustomed to despair. Yet freedom was no gentle gift, it demanded audacity, a willingness to tempt fate and perhaps invite divine scrutiny upon acts born of desperation. For the inhabitants of Cabin 9, this tension manifested in subtle harbingers, signs that whispered of rebellion against the earthly order, laced with spiritual undertones of judgment and grace. The first anomaly was deceptively mundane, a ripple in the fabric of daily drudgery that could have been overlooked as mere forgetfulness. Josiah's prized adze, a curved blade honed to perfection over years of clandestine sharpening, vanished from the communal tool crib beside the stables. To Master Beaumont, it was insignificant chattel; to Josiah, it was an extension of his spirit, a tool that carved not just wood but pathways to survival. He scoured the shed for 3 interminable days, his broad shoulders tense, sweat beading on his brow despite the cooling evenings. The crib's interior smelled of oiled metal and aged leather, shelves cluttered with hammers, chisels, and coils of rope that dangled like nooses in the dim light filtering through cracked walls. Josiah's searches grew frantic, fingers probing shadows, heart pounding with a mix of irritation and an inexplicable dread, as if the loss symbolized a greater unraveling. Then, as mysteriously as it had disappeared, the adze reappeared. Not in the crib, but propped against Cabin 9's weathered side, its handle cool to the touch, blade glinting faintly in the moonlight. Josiah froze, a shiver tracing his spine like the finger of Providence. He knew, with the certainty of one attuned to the rhythms of oppression, that he hadn't placed it there. His eyes scanned the encroaching woods, where cypress trunks loomed like silent witnesses, draped in moss that swayed gently, whispering secrets to the wind. No footsteps marred the soft earth, no figure melted into the darkness. He attributed it to a weary field hand's oversight, but the incident clung to him like Spanish moss to bark, a nagging sense that unseen forces were at play, perhaps testing his resolve or warning of sins yet to be confessed. Not long after, Micah's sharp young gaze caught the next sign, a scattering of coarse sawdust, fresh and fragrant with the resinous bite of cypress, trailing from the wood's shadowy fringe toward the cabin's rear. The boy knelt, small fingers sifting the golden flecks that contrasted starkly against the dark loam, their texture rough like granulated gilt. "Look, Selah," he murmured, voice hushed as if speaking it aloud might summon retribution. Selah crouched beside him, her skirt brushing the dew-kissed grass, inhaling the woody aroma that evoked fresh cuts and hidden labors. "Someone's been sawing," she whispered, her inquisitive eyes narrowing toward the tree-line. But the forest stood impassive, branches unmoved, leaves rustling in a breeze that carried the distant croak of frogs like a choral lament. No felled trees, no stacked lumber, just this ephemeral path, vanishing abruptly at the cabin's edge as if absorbed by the earth itself. By morning, the wind or perhaps a more deliberate hand had erased it, leaving only the memory, a subtle clue in a divine puzzle of liberation. Days later, Naomi paused on her trek to the creek's communal wash basin, the path worn smooth by countless feet, bordered by wild ferns that brushed her calves like insistent prayers. Her eyes, ever vigilant, fixed on a massive live oak that sentineled the boundary between quarters and wilderness. Its bark, thick and furrowed like the lines of an ancient prophet's face, bore faint gouges, shallow, parallel scores too precise for claw or storm. She reached out, palm pressing the rough texture, feeling the subtle indentations that spoke of repeated friction, as if something ponderous had been dragged against it under cover of night. Too elevated for wildlife, too methodical for accident, these marks evoked the scars of penance, reminders of burdens borne in silence. Naomi said nothing, but the image etched itself into her memory, a silent testament to unfolding mysteries, perhaps echoes of biblical labors like Jacob's wrestling in the dark. Micah's nights grew restless, his pallet of corn husks shifting under him as whispers infiltrated his dreams. "I hear them, grandmother," he'd confide to Miriam, eyes wide in the heart's flickering glow, flames dancing like spirits summoned for counsel. Soft voices, like prayers in the wind, and thuds, gentle, like hearts dropping secrets. Miriam would smooth his brow with a hand scented of healing herbs, her voice a soothing incantation, just the bayou speaking, "Child." Owls calling judgment on the wicked. But Micah persisted, describing a cadence, tap-tap pause, rhythmic as a coded gospel, followed by elongated silences heavy with anticipation. He spoke of silhouettes gliding in the moon's silver wash, elongated and purposeful, too human to be beasts, too ethereal to be mere men. "I saw Father and Reuben," he'd insist, moving like angels in the gloom. Come dawn, Josiah and Reuben would meet his queries with stoic shakes, faces masks of inscrutable calm, their eyes holding depths that hinted at sacred pacts. The quarters buzzed with a subtle undercurrent, other souls sensing the shift in Cabin 9's aura. The family, once woven openly into the community's fabric, sharing stories around communal fires, exchanging remedies and rations, drew inward, a cocoon of secrecy. Conversations dipped to murmurs, glances laden with unspoken communion, movements infused with a taut urgency that prickled the air like static before a storm. Ezekiel, the elder who often shared tobacco twists with Josiah under starlit skies, noted the carpenter's distraction, eyes perpetually roving the horizon, ears perked to phantom echoes. "Trouble brewing, brother?" Ezekiel would probe, pipe smoke curling like incense offerings. Josiah's grunt came low, weary bones, nothing more. But the lie hung heavy, a veil over truths that evoked the weight of hidden sins, the biblical caution against bearing false witness even in pursuit of righteousness. Hargrove, the overseer, embodied suspicion incarnate, a man whose soul festered like untended wounds, exacerbated by the war's unraveling certainties. His patrols intensified, boots thudding along gravel paths, lanterns swinging arcs of accusatory light that pierced the night like divine spotlights seeking transgression. The quarters air thickened with his presence, the scent of his sour breath and stale sweat mingling with the earthy damp. He'd linger outside Cabin 9, ear pressed to the logs, straining for betrayal, a muttered plot, a clandestine clink. Nothing met his vigilance but the symphony of crickets and the occasional sigh of wind through cracks. Yet intuition gnawed at him, a spiritual unease that the quiet masked defiance, perhaps a judgment on his own cruelties. He shadowed Josiah during daylight labors, watching the man's precise strokes with chisel and mallet, interpreting focus as furtive scheming. Hargrove's mind, limited by prejudice, conjured petty crimes, pilfered goods, solitary flights. He couldn't fathom the grandeur of what brewed, a symphony of liberation orchestrated in shadows. The atmosphere in the quarters grew oppressive, an invisible mantle of tension that pressed upon shoulders like the yoke of bondage itself. For Cabin 9's kin, every sense heightened, the creak of the main house's veranda board signaling Beaumont's restless pacing, a hound's distant bay piercing like an alarm from hell, rustles in underbrush evoking serpents of temptation. Communication transcended words, glances like coded scriptures, gestures subtle as the Holy Spirit's nudge, bonds forged in the crucible of shared suffering. Miriam anchored them, her presence a beacon of serene faith, eyes reflecting the redemptive promise of Exodus. She'd offer Selah a knowing nod, Micah a tender clasp, Josiah and Reuben silent affirmations that echoed psalms of deliverance. These portents wove into a tapestry of preparation, each anomaly a thread in a narrative of audacious resistance.
The vanishing of Cabin 9 wasn't abrupt sorcery but a painstaking deconstruction, a feat blending human ingenuity with what felt like providential grace. Born from whispers of freedom filtering through the bayous, news of Lincoln's decree, Union's advance, the plan germinated in Miriam's wise counsel, blossomed through Josiah's expertise, and bore fruit in Reuben's might. Selah and Naomi served as sentinels, Micah an unwitting oracle whose observations later pieced the divine riddle. It commenced with the instruments of their craft. Under moonless skies, Josiah and Reuben pilfered essentials from the tool crib: a stout crowbar, tempered chisels, a fine-toothed saw for silent slices, hempen ropes thick as wrists, compact hatchets sharpened to whisper edges. These excursions were ballets of stealth, slipping through shadows scented with night-blooming jasmine, hearts thundering like drums in a forbidden rite. Tools were employed, scoured spotless under creek waters murmuring like confessional streams, then repositioned askew to feign negligence, baffling Hargrove's suspicions and evoking the parable of misplaced talents. The dismantling unfolded in phases, a ritualistic undoing that mirrored the soul's purge of sin. They began aloft, with the roof's cypress shingles, grayed by time, nailed firm as convictions. Josiah innovated, a slender shim of salvaged iron to lift edges gently, a muffled mallet wrapped in rags to coax nails upward without betrayal's squeal. Each tile descended via Selah and Naomi's steady hands from interior perches, passed like sacred relics to waiting arms below. Bundles, light enough for silent transport, vanished into the woods, concealed beneath foliage that rustled like turning pages of scripture. Nights blurred into a haze of peril, the air charged with the resinous perfume of exposed wood, every gust a potential informant. Walls followed, the cabin's very skeleton exposed in vulnerability. Logs, notched and spiked with iron forged in the plantation's hellish smithy, demanded reverence. Josiah's studies, covert inspections by lantern's furtive glow, revealed vulnerabilities, like David's sling against Goliath. Levers from felled branches, fulcrums of stout stumps, eased the burden. In deepest night, they targeted segments, chinking pried loose with fingers trembling like leaves in judgment's wind, logs lifted incrementally to free nails. A contained ember heated spikes to pliancy, preventing snaps that might summon wrath, each extraction a prayerful pull, collected in sacks like tides. The timbers themselves, ponderous as crosses, descended onto improvised sleds, flattened planks lubricated with creek mud, and dragged along padded trails of pine straw, muffling the earth's groans. The oak scars, noted by Naomi, bore witness to rope's friction and logs' passage, etchings like stigmata of their holy labor. Selah and Naomi's roles were pivotal, interiors swept immaculate, debris vanishing into pouches, nails pocketed like redeemed souls. As lookouts, they perched at thresholds, ears attuned to Hargrove's irregular footfalls, the creak of his lantern hinge a harbinger of doom. Micah, stirred from slumber, glimpsed fragments, silhouettes straining, ropes taut like lifelines to salvation, his innocence a shield, his recollections future fragments of lore. The toll etched deep, psyches frayed by perpetual vigilance, bodies aching from nocturnal toils that echoed the Israelites' brickmaking bondage. Fear loomed colossal, the lash's sting, sail's severance, or worse, the gallows embrace for such heresy. Yet hope's ember blazed, visions of unfettered horizons fueling resolve, Miriam's invocations to ancestral guardians weaving a spiritual armor against despair. Climax nights amplified danger. Floorboards yielded easily, pride inspirited away, support beams, monolithic, demanded collective might, ropes looped in intricate webs, rollers of rounded branches easing the slide. Silence reigned supreme, breaths synchronized like choral breaths in a cathedral of shadows. The cabin hollowed, winds infiltrating like the breath of God, chilling exposed forms and underscoring progress toward rebirth. On the final eve, under a sky void of lunar betrayal, chosen when Hargrove drowned suspicions in liquor, only the foundation endured, stones gleaming like altars cleansed of sacrifice. Remnants submerged in swamp depths, weighted by rocks symbolizing shed burdens. The site was sanctified, earth raked smooth, stones wiped with damp linen scented of lye, erasing all but the rectangle's ghost. As dawn's blush kissed the east, they melted into kin cabins, exhaustion mingling with exaltation, a triumph of flesh over iron, spirit over subjugation. In this act, themes of redemption pulsed, dismantling not just wood, but the edifice of sin that was slavery. Was it mere cunning, or divine facilitation, parting obstacles like the Red Sea? The bayou held its secrets, but the void left behind whispered of justice's inexorable march, a chilling legacy where the oppressed claimed agency, tempting fate yet perhaps earning grace in the eyes of the Almighty.
The bayou exhaled its morning breath, a clammy fog that draped the landscape in a shroud of uncertainty, blurring the line between the seen and the unseen, the earthly and the eternal. Magnolia blossoms hung heavy, their perfume mingling with the brackish undertone of swamp water, a sensory veil that masked deeper mysteries. In this liminal hour of April 1865, as the Civil War's embers faded into surrender's ash, Belvue Plantation awoke not to the familiar grind of servitude but to a profound rupture in reality, a void that echoed biblical plagues, where structures and souls could be stricken from the ledger of existence by an unseen scribe. The air hummed with suppressed sounds, roosters' crows muffled as if in reverence, cattle lowing distantly like lamentations, field hands' murmurs subdued by an instinctive awe. It was as if the land itself paused, holding vigil for a miracle or a malediction, where divine justice might manifest in the erasure of man's handiwork. Ezekiel, the venerable sentinel of the quarters, emerged from his own humble shack, pail in hand, his gait a shuffle honed by decades of unyielding toil. His bare soles kissed the rutted path, each step a communion with the soil that had absorbed so much sweat and sorrow. Eyes dimmed by time yet sharp with habit, he veered toward Cabin 9's expected silhouette, ready to summon its dwellers to the day's burdens. But the mist parted like a curtain on Judgment Day, revealing nothingness. A pristine rectangle of river stones, laid long ago in mortared defiance of floods, now lay naked under the paling sky. No jagged remnants of cypress walls. No twisted iron spikes scattered like fallen thorns. No smoldering embers or upheaved dirt. Just the foundation, immaculate as an altar cleansed for sacrifice, dew glistening on its surfaces like tears of the penitent. Ezekiel's pail tumbled, water erupting in a cold baptism that soaked his feet, jolting his senses but failing to dispel the illusion, or was it revelation? He squinted, knuckles rubbing sockets as if to banish a demonic vision, but the void persisted, a chasm in the fabric of the familiar. This wasn't decay or destruction, it was annulment, a spiritual expunging that recalled the fate of Korah, swallowed by the earth for rebellion against the divine order. His cry erupted then, a visceral wail, raw as the first man's lament in Eden's exile, shattering the hush and summoning the quarters to witness. Echoes rippled, drawing souls from their pallets, women clutching shawls against the chill, men in ragged trousers, children peering wide-eyed from doorways. Murmurs swelled to queries, then to inhalations of shock as they beheld the absence. They encircled the sight, breaths clouding the air like incense in a profane ritual, faces carved with dread and wonder. Hands pointed tentatively, eyes roved the tree-line where oaks stood like ancient judges, fields stretching like unharvested souls. Misplaced by the spirits, one whispered. Or lifted by angels? But the grass beyond remained pristine, dew undisturbed, as if the ground had parted in nocturnal mercy, consumed the edifice, and sealed itself with godly finesse. The scene evoked Sodom's aftermath, Lot spared, the wicked vaporized, leaving the onlookers to ponder their own standings in the eyes of Providence. Hargrove erupted from his hovel like a fury unleashed, nightshirt billowing, shotgun gripped like a talisman against the infernal. His countenance, typically a veneer of tyrannical command, twisted into bewilderment laced with fury, cheeks flushed as if branded by shame. What devilry stirs this clamor? He thundered, voice gravelly from sleep's remnants. The throng parted, revealing the anomaly. He barreled forth, boots grinding gravel like teeth on bone, halting at the precipice of emptiness. Jaw unhinged, weapon sagging to earth, his mind, steeped in the plantation's merciless arithmetic, grappled with the incomprehensible. A bastion of logs and stone, forged by enslaved hands to endure, now nullified. Kneeling, joints protesting like creaking gates of hell, he caressed a foundation slab, smooth, chill, unmarred. Inhaling deeply, he sought betrayal, char's bite, rot's cloy, blood's iron kiss. Not but the saccharine dew-kissed soil and faint hearth smoke from afar. The ascending sun, a blazing chalice on the horizon, elongated shadows across the void, transforming it into a spectral maw, more ominous in its sterility. Hargrove's stupor shattered into rage, a tempest of denial. Where have they fled? Miriam, Josiah, Selah, the lot, he bellowed, pivoting to accusatory glares at the assembly. Faces mirrored his confusion, no whispers of departure, no nocturnal disturbances. He dispatched scouts, swift-footed hands, to scour woods, creek beds, cane thickets. Others fetched the hounds, sinewy beasts with noses attuned to quarry. Leash-taut, they nosed the stones, circled the perimeter, whines escaping as confusion overtook instinct. No trail ignited their pursuit, they sat, tails limp, gazes pleading upward, as if the sense had ascended to heaven, leaving no earthly spore. It was erasure absolute, a spiritual sleight where souls in shelter evaded mortal hounds, hinting at rapture or rapture's dark twin.
The gathering swelled, drawn by the spectacle's magnetism, whispers evolving into folklore in the making.
Voodoo veils, some murmured, invoking ancestral shades. Or hellfire so pure it leaves no mark.
Pragmatists posited infernos of unearthly heat or floods of selective wrath, but evidence
rebuked, no cinders, no singe, no sodden remnants, no furrowed ground. The precision chilled, a meticulous unmaking that defied human hands, suggesting divine intervention, perhaps retribution for the plantation's sins, where the oppressed were translated like Enoch, leaving the oppressors to their barren inheritance. The ensuing quietude weighed like judgment's gavel, punctuated by insect hymns and bovine dirges, a world tilted off its axis, foundations of certainty crumbling. Word galloped to Sheriff Elias Thorne by forenoon, borne by a writer pale as parchment, ice-haunted by the uncanny. Thorne, a seasoned arbiter in his 50s, beard clipped precise as his logic, scoffed initially from his office's oak desk, pipe smoke curling like skeptical thoughts.
Vanished cabin?
Poppycock, likely torched in the night, ashes scattered by wind.
But the messenger's fervor, the tremor in his recount, compelled action.
Mounting his steed with deputies in tow, they traversed rutted roads under a climbing sun, skepticism eroding upon arrival at the void. Thorne dismounted, boots sinking slightly into loam, approaching with the gravity of one dissecting scripture.
Gloved fingers traced the stones, unblemished, cool as confessionals. He paced the site, ice-hawkish for anomalies, footprints faded by mist, drag scars veiled by grass.
None surfaced, Duclung uniform beyond the rectangle, a testament to undisturbed sanctity. Aromas yielded only earth's innocence and floral grace, no arson's acrid legacy, no putrefaction, no sanguine hint. Overseer Hargrove, Thorne intoned, voice steady as a psalm, recount the dawn's revelation. Hargrove, frayed and fervent, spilled the tale, pitch escalating, they've evaporated, Sheriff, Josiah's clan, the structure entire. Sorcery, I swear.
Thorne, eschewing the ethereal, orchestrated an antebellum inquisition. Deputies measured the foundation's bounds with tape and chalk, sketching contours on parchment that captured the rectangle's stark geometry. He perambulated the quarter's fringe, wood's threshold, seeking breaches, broken boughs, trampled undergrowth. The forest repelled inquiry, dense and silent as a confessor's vow. Creek banks lay serene, waters murmuring placidly, no upheaval in their flow.
Interrogations ensued, each soul sequestered from Hargrove's glare, in a makeshift tent of canvas that smelled of horse and haste.
Thorne probed, speak of Cabin 9's folk oddities? Whispers of flight?
Responses harmonized in reticence, kin revered for diligence, healers of body and spirit, no nocturnal flights observed. Yet eyes held shadows, fear mingled with a defiant gleam, a collective covenant unspoken, evoking the early church's secrecy amid persecution. Thorne sensed the undercurrent, a spiritual solidarity forged in chains, but probes yielded only illusions to wind's whispers, owls' omens, dreams of deliverance.
Hargrove endured reprise scrutiny, patrols detailed, vigils affirmed.
Not stirred, Sheriff, 'tis unearthly. Thorne waved off mysticism, no phantoms here, only enigmas of flesh and fact. He pondered aloud the cabin's mass, timbers hefty as sins, shingles layered like accusations, furnishings sparse yet substantial. How relocate such bulk sans wagons, beasts, without splinter or scar? Calculations murmured, disassembly spanning weeks, cacophonous labors, debris trails inevitable. Yet silence prevailed, paths pristine, theories fell like false idols, conflagration? No residue, no char, flames devouring whole would scar the soil eternal.
Deluge?
Parched earth, tranquil streams, no tidal marks on trunks.
Sabotage?
Absent tools, rubble, clamor, demolition demands din. Each dismissal deepened the spiritual chill, the void, a parable of vanity, where man's constructs dissolve like mist before the divine. Thorne's brow furrowed, gut twisting with unease, was this God's red pencil, editing the narrative of oppression? As midday sun beat down, casting harsh illuminations on the emptiness, whispers among the enslaved wove a tapestry of hope, the Lord hath freed them, as Moses' kin. Fear tempered it, what if the vanishing heralded broader reckoning,
sins of masters raining plagues upon all.
Hargrove paced, whip idle but threat implicit, his authority fracturing like the absent walls. Thorn's deputies combed farther bayou edges where roots twisted like serpents of temptation, fields where cotton bolls bobbed like unclaimed souls. Not emerged but the land's indifferent beauty, a canvas wiped clean. By afternoon, the investigation's futility gnawed, Thorn mounting his horse with a sigh heavy as scripture's weight.
We'll return with more men, lanterns for night scrutiny.
But in his eyes flickered doubt, a crack in empirical armor, pondering if some acts transcended mortal ken, divine justice manifesting his absence, a haunting legacy where the erased whispered warnings to the remaining.
The quarters settled into uneasy vigil, sun dipping toward twilight, shadows lengthening like fingers of fate across the void.
Sensory assaults persisted, the prick of chill despite warmth, the metallic fear on tongues, the bayou's chorus a requiem for the lost. In this tableau, themes of redemption and retribution intertwined, the vanished perhaps exalted, spared the lash for faithfulness, the beholders left to reflect on their chains, spiritual and corporeal.
Was it mercy's hand or wrath's?
The foundation stones, enduring witnesses, held silent counsel, their cleanliness a chilling emblem of purity reclaimed. As night encroached, fires kindled in surviving hearts, flames dancing like hopeful spirits, while prayers ascended, beseeching clarity in the mystery, or perhaps, their own translation from bondage's grip. The enigma of Cabin 9 lingered, a spiritually charged scar on Belvue's soul, forcing confrontation with the impermanence of power, the inexorability of judgment. In the heart of Louisiana's gloaming, where history bled into eternity, the void stood as testament, even stone yields to the divine will, and silence can roar with revelation. The investigation unraveled like a frayed rope under strain, each thread of inquiry snapping against the unyielding wall of absence. Sheriff Elias Thorn, his methodical soul forged in courthouse ledgers and courtroom truths, paced the pristine rectangle of stones, boots leaving faint imprints in the dew that would evaporate by noon like fleeting confessions. Even a deliberate raising leaves scars, he muttered to his deputies, voice low as a prayer unanswered. Splinters, ash, wheel ruts, something.
But this? It's theft of the impossible. Who pilfers an entire dwelling, souls and all, without so much as a whisper from the earth?
Deputies fanned outward in widening arcs, combing miles of bayou fringe and cane fields where stalks swayed like silent mourners. Lanterns bobbed through undergrowth thick with vines that clutched like grasping sins, boots sinking into mud scented with decay and hidden life. They sought footprints fading into legend, broken branches testifying to passage, discarded remnants of flight. Nothing surfaced, no heel print in soft loam, no snapped twig bearing the weight of desperation, no scrap of cloth snagged on thorn. The bloodhounds, summoned anew with fresh desperation, circled the foundation once more, noses low to the immaculate stones. Their whines rose plaintive, tails drooping as confusion overtook instinct. They sat, defeated sentinels, gazing upward as if the sense had ascended to realms beyond canine reach. It evoked the biblical hounds of hell turned impotent before divine mercy, or perhaps judgment deferred. Thorn's frustration mounted, a slow burn in his chest like embers of doubt. He summoned reinforcements from Baton Rouge and New Orleans, men of broader experience, armed with calipers, notebooks, and the era's nascent forensic rigor. They arrived by steamer, faces grave under wide-brimmed hats, disembarking onto the plantation dock where river water lapped like indifferent time. Together they measured, sketched, probed, soil samples sifted for foreign particles, perimeter walked in concentric rings, air sniffed for lingering anomalies. Their conclusions mirrored Thorn's, pristine, inexplicable. No wagon grooves scarred the paths, no drag furrows marred the grass, no olfactory trace of sweat-soaked timber or hurried flight. The cabin's mass, hundreds of pounds of cypress, iron, and human hope had evaporated without mechanical aid, without clamor, without evidence of mortal hands. Word seeped outward like bayou mist, impossible to contain. Local broadsheets seized the tale with sensational ink, mystery in the bayou, cabin and kin vanish without trace. Plantation phantom, divine wrath or devil's deed? Headlines screamed across parish lines, fueling parlor gossip and tavern debates. The story burrowed into the collective psyche of a region raw from war's end, where emancipation's promise clashed with fear of chaos. For white planters, it was apocalypse foretold, a symbol of eroding dominion. If walls and workers could dissolve overnight, what safeguard remained against the tide of change? Panic rippled through grand houses, overseers' patrols doubled under moonless skies, hounds kept leashed and vigilant, nocturnal wanderers met with lash or worse. Whispers of abolitionist phantoms or lingering Union saboteurs prompted frantic missives to crumbling Confederate remnants, begging armed protection from this unseen terror. Yet no copycats matched the purity of Belvue's vanishing. Sporadic escapes occurred, aided by nascent networks born of wartime shadows, but none erased every trace with such chilling exactitude. Cabin 9 stood alone, a singular act of erasure that haunted like an unresolved psalm. Silas Hargrove bore the deepest wound, the incident carving into his spirit like a slow blade. Once a pillar of brutal certainty, he now wandered the quarters at dusk, eyes hollow, breath whiskey sour. He'd halt at the foundation's edge, fingers tracing stones worn smooth by time and perhaps divine intent, muttering accusations to phantoms. Shadows danced where none existed, winds carried mocking voices. Convinced the family lingered nearby hiding, taunting, he drove exhausted hands through swamp and thicket, lanterns flickering like dying faith. Duties eroded, his commands cracked with desperation. Master Beaumont, face lined with the strain of failing empire, finally severed him, dismissal delivered in the dim parlor, Hargrove's protests dissolving into broken silence. He departed Belvue a spectral figure, drifting to lesser posts, mind ensnared by the void. Taverns became his confessional, bottle in hand, he'd rail against dark sorcery, eyes darting as if expecting the cabin's reappearance. He perished a few years hence, final breaths a delirious plea to reclaim what was lost, control, authority, perhaps his soul. For the enslaved and newly freed, the vanishing resonated differently, a complex chord of terror and transcendence. Surface fear acknowledged the peril, unpredictability's blade hung sharper than ever. Yet beneath stirred embers of audacious hope. If timber and kin could vanish without ripple, defying overseer's gaze and master's ledger, then chains might likewise dissolve. The tale circulated in hushed circles around hearth fires where embers glowed like suppressed promises, in field edges where songs masked strategy, in dreams where freedom wore no shackles. It became scripture of resistance, proof that ingenuity, allied with providence, could outmaneuver oppression. Quiet inspiration kindled dreams of exodus, of lives rebuilt beyond whip's reach. The foundation, though empty, pulsed with symbolic power, a testament to agency wrested from bondage, a moral rebuke to the system that had deemed them property. Authorities pressed on, but futility prevailed. Thorne, pride tempered by humility, archived the file as unsolved, circumstances inexplicable. Regional investigators retreated to mundane crimes, newspapers shifted to Reconstruction's upheavals. Yet the legend swelled, embellished across decades. By the 1870s, as Belvue fragmented, land sold piecemeal, grand house decaying under vines, the stones endured, overgrown with weeds and moss like nature's own memorial. Freed communities passed the story generationally, elders to children around northern hearths, tales of miraculous flight woven with moral lessons. Some invoked divine rapture, God plucking the faithful like Enoch. Others spoke of conjure or cunning, a family spirited by ancestral forces or underground railroad mastery. Subtle echoes emerged in distant cities. In Chicago's burgeoning black neighborhoods, a carpenter renowned for salvaging and repurposing aged timber worked with meticulous grace. Hands that once pried nails in silence now built anew. His name, Josiah. Eyes held stargazing wisdom, past unspoken but presence resonant with quiet triumph. In New Orleans, an elder healer dispensed remedies from a modest apothecary, white-haired yet sharp-eyed, stories of resilience shared without naming the source. Called Miriam, she embodied enduring strength. A teacher in St. Louis freedmen's schools ignited young minds with literacy and collective courage. Selah, dignity incarnate. A northern guide navigated hidden paths for seekers of new beginnings. Caleb, memory sharp as ever, preaching the gospel of traceless movement. Coincidences? Perhaps. Definitive links evaded record, as intended. The Underground Railroad's legacy, networks of trust, silence, audacious planning, mirrored the feat, people made to disappear, traces effaced with deliberate care. Cabin 9's vanishing embodied its pinnacle, not flight alone, but total unmaking of captivity's architecture. The case cooled officially, yet the legend burned brighter. The foundation, now a relic amid encroaching wildness, offered no closure, only questions etched in stone. Was it miracle, meticulous human defiance, or both, divine will working through mortal hands? In Louisiana's eternal twilight, where bayou waters reflect uncertain skies, it stands as haunting testament. Since structures can fall silent, souls reclaim agency, and justice, when it comes, may leave no footprint, only an empty space echoing redemption's promise.